currently is a studio artist based out of Dallas, Texas. He recently completed a 2-year long-term residency at the Archie Bray Foundation in Helena, Montana. He's taught at West Virginia University, Penn State University, and the Archie Bray Foundation, and served as a studio technician at multiple public and private studios. He received an MFA in Studio Arts at Penn State University in 2014 and a BFA from Southern Methodist University in 2010, and completed his post-baccalaureate studies at Syracuse University in 2012. Please welcome Brooks Oliver.
Hello, my name is Brooks Oliver. Thank you for being here, and a special thanks to NSECA for this really amazing opportunity. So I wanted to start my talk with a quote that I first heard from Chris Staley, and it's a quote from Barbara Hepworth, and it's perhaps what one wants to say is learned in their childhood, and we just spend the rest of our lives figuring out how to say it. And I really like this quote because I really do believe my childhood to be the root of everything that I do. That being said, I wanted to introduce you to my family. A disclaimer, I do not have a photo of all of us, so I kind of cropped my brother in on the side. So my family, again, is very important to me, but you see, my brother and sister take after my father, and they see the world in a very black and white mentality. Things have right and wrong answers. While my mother and myself are different, we're relators. We inherently kind of relate to people. So everything is, we don't see things as black and white. We see them in a very gray kind of way. So stemming from my family, I find myself fascinated with this black and white way of thinking, or I guess more specifically, this charged gray area between two binaries. So to elaborate with that idea, this is a photo of me in my studio, taking one of those professional, headshots. But this is not how most people know me. But rather, this is me on a boat. Thank you. And this sums me up pretty well. Yeah. My life as a gay person has very much changed recently. Marriage equality is now a thing, but there's also this really shaming legislation against the LGBTQ community right now. And also love has entered my life. Cupid really needs to work on his aim a bit, but yeah, love has been in my life. So I'm thinking about my sexuality more and more. And I'm making these connections to my work. So, society sets up this binary of man and woman. In my mind, gay people bridge this binary system that our society has taught us. Many gay people do identify as man or woman, but the gender stereotypes are kind of blurred with a queer individual. So I kind of live in this charged gray area. And my work does as well. The dualities that my work kind of lives between are, I guess, something being sculptural or being more utilitarian, or being made by hand or digital means, or industrious or craft-oriented. So with that in mind, my work attempts to reimagine and reinterpret the familiar functional vessel. One could argue that the vessel, particularly the ceramic vessel, is a very familiar thing to most people. And I try to provide the viewer with something that is familiar, but also somehow I try to put a twist on it of sorts, so that it is as alien as it is familiar. So within these Fruit Loops, I wanted to make a fruit bowl that was more about being a boundary or an edge than it ever was of actually, having a bottom and containing something. By isolating, altering, and exploiting the necessary components that comprise what makes up a vessel, I attempt to provide new visions of utilitarian ceramic wares. This fruit bowl, it's familiar because it's terracotta, but its form is not necessarily recognizable in our repertoire of forms. Within these vases, I asked myself, how can a vase present its flowers in a different way? The vase on the left is all about looking in versus something coming out. And the vase on the right, I wanted to create a vase that allowed the viewer to appreciate the entirety of the flowers it contains. So in undergrad, I used to show a bunch of my forms on the edges of pedestals, and people get really nervous when clay is on the edge of something. And so people would actually come up to the piece, pick it up and move it to the center where they thought it belonged, which I kind of related to like my childhood, people trying to make me fit this norm. So I made a vase that could only live on the edge of a table. Similarly, does a vase even have to sit on a surface? What does a vase that can only live on the wall look like? With these, I was trying to rethink the common foot of a vessel. So rather than giving it one foot, I gave it a bunch of multiple like little tippy toes. Can a vessel be more of a line than it is a mass? Can a vessel somehow be playful? Color has really emerged in my work recently. And John Gill once told me that if I ever wanted to be fearless with color, I really needed to get a new wardrobe. And so I did. Thanks. Okay, so this is my ode to Queen Bee. The top is called Formation, and the bottom is called I've Got Hot Sauce in My Bag. I wanted to make a vase that was more about movement and gesture, and not necessarily in the way that, you have that presence of the maker and that touch. I find myself making vases with multiple openings, and I think it has to do with somehow with forcing the viewer to become more engaged in the flower arranging process, because flower arranging is also very important to me. It shows the vessel performing and doing its job. I've always been fascinated with the vase because I feel like it's kind of all about presentation and display. It's kind of like the martini glass. At a workshop I did at the Manchester Craftsman's Guild, I got to collaborate with an Ikebana florist, and they really took everything to a whole new level. In my mind, flowers can really change the soul of a piece. Arrangements can be fun and channel things like Dr. Seuss, or they can be really serious and dramatic. So to go back to my earlier quote by Barbara Hepworth, I had a lot of really odd talents and interests as a child. I legitimately was a clown that did magic tricks, and I have balloon animals in my bag at all times. I'm literally, if you watch Modern Family, I am Cam. Like, seriously. But yeah, so I did magic, and I relate a lot of my process back to magic. And it's something that isn't necessarily important for the viewer to know, but it does inform the work and how I think. So the role of magician is to present you with something familiar, and then to take that familiar thing and make the unexpected from it. It's kind of known as the turn. And my work tries to do the same thing. I present you with something familiar, the ceramic vessel, and then I try to do the unexpected with it. But the first thing a magician does is they create a context to what it is you're about to see. They kind of set the stage. And so similarly, I try to control the totality of the context in which how someone experiences my work. I make my own tables and displays while considering how light and sound and sometimes even smell can create these contexts that changes how you see the work. My tables are designed to enhance and reflect the vessels on them. I want the viewer to ask questions about what it is they're seeing. Are these tools? This table's at workbench height. It's made of raw plywood and pipe. Is this in a design store? Is this like maybe something you'd see in an architectural firm? Or are these actors on a stage? So in my mind, the vessel is all about ideas of containment and then transporting. So a vessel has the inherent potential to move, but a vessel should never necessarily move on its own or maybe in an unexpected way. So my Wobble series was all about creating forms that had this inherent potential to move. And they're shown on a hanging table that actually lets the pieces kind of become self-describing. A few words regarding my process. My work also attempts to blur the boundaries between technology and the hand and industry and craft. I utilize digital technologies like 3D printers and CAD programs and CNC mills. This is my digital hand slash my 3D printer. Her name is Lulz. So it's interesting, sometimes in the craft field, we seem to think that the hand is somehow removed from the digital process. And my good friend and mentor Shannon Goff had this great quote, and she would always talk about how the term digital stems from the root of digit, which is of the hand. So I'm fascinated with these new technologies while enthralled with traditional ways of making. They're all very plastic in my mind, and they're all tools. Chris Staley has this quote about process, and it's that process saves us from the poverty of our intentions. And I love that quote, and I believe it. And prototyping sometimes sets up these potential problems that really influence the work. So this piece is a prototype for a vase. And it was milled on the CNC mill, but the mill could not mill something that tall, so it had to be broken into these 3 pieces. And I found these to be way more interesting. So I took molds of them, I slip cast them, and then they turned into these. And these are so much cooler in my mind. It's not important for the viewer to know that the work is at all involved with 3D printing, and I actually go to really great lengths to remove any residual tooling mark from that process. That being said, for me, rapid prototyping is a tool and something that informs the design process. I wouldn't have gotten there necessarily any other way. If you've ever seen a 3D printer do its thing, you know that it repeats the same movements over and over and over and over again until it actually builds up a form. And it sits right next to, it sits in my studio, and oddly enough, I kind of find myself imitating my printer. So at the end of the day, I do these repetitive line drawings, and my hand just does the same drawing over and over and over again. And so then I've been taking these drawings, or for this one, I took this drawing, I scanned it into the computer, and then the computer interpreted it, and then the final image was cut into plywood. So I'm imitating my printer when making the drawing, then the computer interprets my drawing or my hand, and then the laser cutter cuts the final image. So I love this back and forth dialogue between the 2 digitals. I studied mechanical engineering for 3 years in undergrad until the best mentor of all time, Peter Bieseker, convinced me to switch my majors to art. Oddly enough, those 3 years have really been coming back into the swing of things because I've been starting to use the 3D printer to make my own tools. And this image kind of sums that process up. So on the top left is the prototypes that were printed on the printer, and then I'm using the printer to create scaffolding on the bottom left that helps me assemble the piece once it's actually in clay, and then the final piece is on the right. Currently, I'm at a point of transition within my life as I recently completed a residency at the Archie Bray. The Bray is no doubt one of the most special places I've ever been. And that's because of all these amazing people, the Bray family, and I'm really humbled to have been part of it and to continue to be part of it. And I'd be amiss to come up here and not thank Steve Lee for that amazing opportunity. After leaving the Bray in September, I had the amazing opportunity to travel to China with West Virginia University's China program. And if you've been to China, one thing you know is it's kind of known for its multiples and the sheer number of things. The most fascinating multiple to me, however, was this. I found myself constantly looking up at all the cables everywhere. And I was simply awestruck by the sheer number of them. And I thought it would be so much harder if one of them were to break to find it versus just throwing up another one, which is, I think, how they got here. But, so needless to say, these tangles started showing up in my tile design. Some more literal, some more abstract. But something about the idea of glorifying this chaos and clutter in gold kind of just tickles me. So similarly to looking up, I found myself constantly looking down at the cracked sidewalks. So I started making these large cracked tiles, essentially. They were created by pouring casting slip onto already vitrified ceramic tiles, and then the slip was fired again, and that's how the resulting piece was created. My latest journey has me relocating back to my home of Dallas, and I've just finished setting up my new studio. So I'm actually starting up a new company with my good friend, Clayton Colley, and I want to produce my work at a larger level and start working with other artists to produce their work at larger levels. So, and yeah, in terms of shameless self-promotion, I'd like to introduce to you Oliver Colley. So we'll see what comes from this. So I started my presentation with a photo of my family. And in a quirky tradition, I always like to end my talks with a photo of my friends, because my friends are everything to me, and I wouldn't be here without them. I also wanted to thank all of the amazing mentors and teachers who have shaped me into the artist that I am and the thinker that I am today, as well as the amazing communities that I've been a part of over the years. Without you, I wouldn't be here. So on that note, thank you. Follow me.